Welcome to the RotoWire NBA podcast. It is Wednesday, November 25th, the day before Thanksgiving. That does not stop myself, Nick Whalen, or my co-host, Alex Barutha, from talking about the NBA, as we are wont to do. Alex, obviously a lot to get to in terms of free agency. A ton has happened over the last week, and news continues to trickle in, not only on Monday and Tuesday, but even into Wednesday morning as well. But at this point, most of the major dominoes, Alex, have fallen. And I think we could pretty confidently talk about a lot of these deals. Most are starting to become finalized. We're starting to get more details in terms of the contracts. And now, getting a better picture of how these deals are going to impact the season that begins in earnest in less than a month. So we'll start at the top. I feel like we're almost obligated to start with this. Josh Jackson to the Detroit Pistons, a team that was very active over this past week. I feel like Detroit and Oklahoma City, as I'm, I have all these alerts set up on my phone, and it was like every other deal was involving one of those two teams. But for me, I mean, Josh Jackson to Detroit, like how much does this raise Detroit's ceiling next season?
I mean, he could come in, average, combined 6 steals and blocks. We saw that upside in college. He's been in bad situations. I think this is an opportunity for him to start fresh. Detroit
native. Love the signing for Detroit. I think this is one of those that, kind of completely flips the league on its head. But realistically, where do you want to begin? We can start with Drew Holiday to the Bucks, although that deal, is several days old at this point. I want to turn it to you. Which deal stuck out to you most, whether it was, one that you really loved, one that you were kind of baffled by, one that you couldn't believe, let's say maybe Marcus Morris getting $64 million. Where do you want to begin? It's the ball's in your court.
That was so shocking. I think I put it away in a separate part of my brain because I forgot it happened until you just mentioned it.
Couldn't believe it.
I kind of want to start with the Hawks. The Gallinari signing, they got Rondo, Dunn, obviously Bogdanovich, that went through yesterday. I think they're one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting team in the league. You wrote that in our document here. They are going to, I've seen people say, they're going to compete for the 8th seed now. They might compete for the 5th seed, maybe the 4th seed if everything breaks right. There are a lot of questions I still have. Can Gallinari play the 3? Probably not. Are they going to try to move John Collins? Is Bogdanovich as good as NBA Twitter thinks he is? A lot of stuff like that, but they're really interesting right now.
They are. I'm not sure I'm willing to go that high on the ceiling for this coming season. I love the moves that they made, especially in a free agency when you're looking out there and it's pretty unappealing. And I think Atlanta was, in that Charlotte category where you're like, oh boy, this could get dangerous. Only a few teams have cap space. There's not a lot of great players out there. Will they spend this wisely? For Charlotte, which we'll get to, I think the answer in my mind, at least, is no. They probably spurged on a player in Gordon Hayward that I think is relatively limited upside-wise. I thought Atlanta was really smart about how they distributed that money. Throwing $18 million a year at Bogdanovich, it's a lot of money, but it's not crushing. It's not a massive overpay, I don't think. Maybe some concerns about how Gallinari is going to age, but he's clearly an upgrade over what they were running out on the wing last year. I think that maybe the most clear overpay is Rondo, but you're more so paying for the experience. Somebody who I think is going to probably hold Trae Young a little more accountable than anyone else on that roster last year. I think that was kind of a known overpay, if you will. And then I think one of the really sneaky signings that I liked a lot was Chris Dunn, who had fallen out of favor in Chicago, but I mean a lot of the defensive metrics painted him as arguably the best defensive guard in the league last season. And I think Atlanta has built a really thoughtful roster right now around Trae Young, in that if you have the worst defensive player in the league in your backcourt handling 30% of your possessions, you need to offset that with one of the best defensive guards in the league in Chris Dunn, I should say. So, I now have some questions about where does this leave Kevin Huerter? Where does this leave Cam Reddish, who looked really good at the end of last year? Where does this even leave DeAndre Hunter? All three of those guys, I would say on paper, no longer project as starters. You also have the number 6 pick in Onyeka Okongwu. So all of a sudden, I mean, they go from this team that it was going to be a really fun, run for the 8th seed, with these young guys to you kind of have competing values where, if you're Bogdanovich, if you're Gallinari, if you're Rondo, you're winning now. But Trae Young's only going into his third year. Like I said, Okongwu, hasn't even played an NBA game yet. So they have kind of that interesting mix of veterans and young guys. Oftentimes that can kind of clash and end up being a little disappointing. Like to me, Milwaukee, Boston, Miami, Philly, Brooklyn, even Toronto, I would say are pretty firmly ahead of Atlanta. Where I think it gets interesting if you start comparing the Hawks to a team like Indiana, who was firmly in the playoffs last year. I think they're better, at least on paper, than Orlando. They're certainly better than most of those teams that were in their category last year. Charlotte, Washington, Chicago, the Knicks. They vaulted themselves over those teams.
Yeah, I think. They're one of the deepest teams in the East now, at least with that young core.
One of the deepest teams in the league.
Yeah, with the young core as the backup, basically. They might win a lot of games because their bench outperforms other teams' benches. But yeah, they're way deeper than a team like Boston, for example, who lost Gordon Hayward for virtually nothing. Added Jeff Teague and Tristan Thompson, but who knows there? And I don't know. Maybe this season, the shortened season, there's going to be a lot of back-to-backs. Maybe to some extent, it will be kind of a war of attrition, and a lot of guys are missing games. Atlanta has the opportunity to still win a lot of those games. I just think their upside is, I think, pretty high. Trae Young is really good. Mm-hmm. John Collins, a lot of people don't know who he is, like casual NBA fans,
Yeah.
But he's very good. I'm interested to see if they end up maybe trading some of those young guys for another piece. But as of right now, I love the moves they made, honestly.
They're to just be flexible over the next year or two, whether it's trading, like you said, Reddish, Hunter was the 4th overall pick 2 years ago, Herder. There would be a lot of interest in those guys. And then, if you have to turn around and trade Bogdanovich in a year or two, I think that's going to end up being a fine contract. If you have to pick between Collins and Capella at some point, there's obviously John Collins would be a massive trade piece. So they're in a really, really good spot, I think, for the future. And this season's going to tell us a lot, I think, about Trae Young. They've built. This is by far the best supporting cast he's had. It's only been 2 years so far, but this, if they stumble out of the gate and they're still not winning games and he's still this huge liability on defense with this roster around him, I think you have to start to reassess a little bit. But I think, in terms of a guy you look at, kind of playing that same style as Steph Curry, obviously not as efficient, not making the wow plays that Steph was, but, there was kind of that year for Steph after the ankle injuries where everything clicked and it was like, okay, this guy has gone from a really nice borderline all-star, good scorer to like maybe one of the best players in the league. And I think Trae Young, the pieces are in place for him to make his like Luka type of ascent, which I think Doncic made over the second half of last year. I think this is a really big opportunity, I guess, for Trae Young to kind of flip what's become a little bit of a good team or a good stats, bad team narrative early in his career. So big opportunity for him. You mentioned Boston losing Gordon Hayward. I keep hearing people bash Boston, for losing Kyrie and losing Isaiah Thomas and then losing Gordon Hayward, losing him for nothing. That is something. And they are, as of this morning, Boston is still working on potentially making that a sign and trade with Charlotte, which would benefit both teams. For Boston, it would free up a pretty hefty trade exception, which would be, pretty huge for Boston, whether that's this deadline or around this time next year. And then for Charlotte, you would need a third team essentially to take the Nick Batum expiring, which is a massive pill to swallow. Right now, in order to accommodate Hayward, Charlotte would have to stretch Batum, which is just not something you ever want to do. You really don't want to be stretching anyone ever, especially a contract like that. It's right when you're about to get off of it, to stretch it and then have it be on your books for years into the future is unappealing, to say the least. So we'll see what materializes there. If Boston can get a trade exception, that's great. But like you said, I think the bigger concern right now is not getting any kind of actual return for Hayward in terms of a physical player. Leaves you pretty starved for depth. They still have a great starting five if you're projecting Kemba, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and then whatever they do at center. We'll get to that. That's pretty damn good. But all of a sudden your backup shooting guard might be a rookie in Aaron Nesmith, and you're going to be relying on guys like Grant Williams and potentially Romeo Langford, who was not good as a rookie last year, for bigger roles than you'd probably like to. I love the addition of Jeff Teague as a backup point guard. I think he's become really underrated these last couple of years, and he's probably overqualified at this point to be a backup point guard. But I also, on paper, I like the Thompson addition, Tristan Thompson. I'm just not really sure what that solves for them. Does he start over Tice? By the end of last year, it really looked like they had started to trust Robert Williams more. All of a sudden now he's pretty clearly the number 3 guy. So I didn't really understand. I like the additions, like I said, in a vacuum. I didn't really understand the Thompson one from a depth perspective.
Yeah, I think getting Jeff Teague is good because Kemba Walker's knee is apparently still not 100%. He might be limited to start the season, so having a legitimate, guy who can play 30 minutes a night in Jeff Teague, that's good. But you're right. Like, I was looking at the depth of this team. I was writing outlooks for the site. Like, Aaron Nesmith is going to play for this team. Like, he might play 28 minutes a game for them. Grant Williams going to play a lot. The Tristan Thompson thing does really feel like you're putting a Band-Aid on a larger problem. And I like Tristan Thompson. He's won a championship with LeBron, but it was really shocking when the Celtics did not do the sign and trade with the Pacers with Gordon Hayward that would have gotten them. It sounded like they were going to get Miles Turner.
Right.
And from what I hear, Danny Ainge doesn't like Miles Turner's contract, which is, I think, like $18 million over 3 years or something. Which to me is not a bad deal. I know he hasn't been amazing and maybe he hasn't hit his potential, but it's kind of the perfect fit for Boston, right? He's still a stretch 5. He plays defense.
Right.
I know he's not a great rebounder, but
how many better centers are there than Miles Turner? And I'm not saying like he's this, top 3 center in the league, but there's just not that many great centers. And it's like, yeah, maybe he's not your ideal center, but if you don't have Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic or Rudy Gobert or Anthony Davis, he's kind of in that next tier, right?
I think so. I'm sure the Bucks would prefer him over Brook Lopez. The Raptors would need him. Obviously someone like Miami wouldn't need them, but Brooklyn could use Miles Turner. Like, there's just a lot of teams in the league would gladly take Miles Turner, and for some reason, Boston just does not want him.
Yeah, very strange. It felt like Boston was a little bit worse, or at least stayed the same. Do you think it's fair, real quickly, by the way, to characterize this last 4 or 5 years for Boston as a failure, not making the finals, with the hitting on some of those draft picks that they got from Brooklyn, in Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but the Kyrie thing kind of going haywire. I think in a lot of ways misplaying the Isaiah Thomas thing from an optics perspective. Obviously the Hayward deal, it doesn't really go as you think. A lot of it to me feels like just kind of random bad luck. And I don't really see it as a failure by any means. I think hitting on the Tatum and the Brown picks especially sets you up well. And yeah, it's tough to, I think they were up 3-2 on that terrible LeBron Cavs team in 2018 and couldn't finish the deal. And obviously they, were in there with Miami this past year in the bubble. But I don't know. To me, I don't look back and be like, wow, another choke job for this Boston core. I don't really see it that way.
No, they were only bad for one season. Right, 2013-14, they won 25 games, and then they ended up with basically Tatum and Brown. And ever since 2016-17, they've been to at least the Eastern Conference semifinals and been to the Eastern Conference finals 3 of those times. They've lost, but when you get to the Eastern Conference finals 3 out of the past 4 years with a core that includes Jason Tatum, who is 22, that's not a failure.
Well, I think the argument is you had those guys on rookie deals. It's like having an NFL quarterback who's really good right away, you could spend elsewhere. And I think it's like it felt like they never quite went all in. Well, those guys were really good on, making peanuts. But at the same time, the Davis trade, for example, was, potentially on the table for a while. That would require you to give up Tatum. And I think at that point, it's like, yeah, Anthony Davis is better than Jason Tatum, but I still don't know if losing Tatum and replacing him with Anthony Davis was ever going to be enough to put them over the top during these last few years.
No, it sounded like Davis didn't want to be there anyway.
Right. That's the other thing. Way too risky long term. Let's go to the Sixers, who have completely revamped their roster. I'm interested to see what you think about how this came out, because I think from a pure talent perspective or name recognition perspective, you would look at this and say maybe they got worse. They lost Al Horford, they lost Josh Richardson, who I really like, who admittedly maybe a little overrated at this point. Danny Green, you're bringing him in when his stock is at its absolute lowest, which I think maybe plays into this as well. But if you're betting on a Danny Green bounce back, I think you could talk yourself into it. What I really like is the addition of Seth Curry. I think Josh Richardson is a better defensive player. He's a more versatile player, but I think Seth Curry is exactly what the 76ers need. And we talk about kind of having to specialize a roster around Trae Young. In some ways, you have to do the same thing for Ben Simmons, and getting him to, dead eye, at least in the regular season, Danny Green, and, permanently Seth Curry, dead eye shooters. I think it was the right move, even if it, you kind of had to bite the bullet on Horford and admit defeat with that one. I think that's fine. And I think it was a nice kind of first week, I guess, for Daryl Morey to come in and very clearly already put his stamp on this team.
I agree with you. They lost name recognition. They lost overall talent. I think this fig is better. Maybe they want to really play, which I think makes sense. They also gained just general flexibility with their roster and with their finances, like getting rid of both of those deals. And they kept their third best player in Tobias Harris, who is, overpaid, but his contract was going to be, I think, practically impossible to move. Mm-hmm. And they managed to move Al Horford, but that was to the Thunder. That hardly counts. I think they kind of got worse on paper, but again, they added 3 and D players, and that's kind of just what you need around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid.
All right, let's look at the reverse of that then. Let's go to the Thunder. I don't even know where to begin here. Like I always use like our RotoWire depth charts as a guide, when checking out these rosters. We have 13 players currently listed at small forward. We have 13 players currently listed as potential options at power forward, 7 centers. And this roster it felt like it's been turned over completely multiple times over the last couple of weeks. And anytime there was a situation where you needed to dump a contract, like an Al Horford or a Trevor Ariza, the Thunder were willing and able to take that on. And I think they're going down the exact path that we thought they would. Gone is Gallinari, gone is Schroeder, Chris Paul obviously is gone. Steven Adams is now a Pelican. This roster is completely turned over. SGA is the only piece, that really remains that you feel great about right now. I mean, they're going to they're taking the approach of like, we'll take on anybody with a little bit of potential, and we'll give them the opportunity that they might not have elsewhere, and hopefully it turns into something. It's hard to look up and down this roster and feel great about like Hami Diallo or Admiral Schofield or Isaiah Roby, turning into something great, but they're going to try it. And they're also almost certainly, apologies to SGA, they're almost certainly going to be in an awesome position for what's shaping up to be a loaded 2021 draft as well. So, I mean, they're positioning themselves perfectly, I think, for the next decade. The question is just at what point do you start to maybe think about cashing in on this insane amount of draft capital that they built up?
Yeah, I mean, it does look like they very well may start Amadou Diallo, Lou Dort, and Darius Baisley, which is awful. That's process Sixers level, you know. And they might start Al Horford, I guess. I would be surprised if Al Horford,
that might be worse than any of those.
Yeah, and unless they can trade him, but I don't know if that's going to happen. SGA, this is SGA's team at this point, right? Like he's going to take every shot. He's going to be insane in fantasy. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the right move for OKC. I think they did the right thing. When you tank, you just do it. You do it like this, right? And yeah, positioning yourself for the 2021 draft when so many other teams in the league are trying to be good, I think makes a lot of sense because you're practically guaranteeing yourself a top 5 pick.
Yeah, exactly. And I do wonder how low they will sink because you have a new coach in place. I think outside of SGA, at least with Al Horford, you have like a baseline level of competence with a guy who's that much of a veteran and has that much experience. I think they could maybe be a little better than you'd think, just because so many, like, they're not going to be, like, you compare it to the process Sixers, they were rolling out a bunch of like 19 and 20-year-olds who were like basically G League level players. At least some of these guys, Diallo's been in the league a few years. They still have George Hill. They grabbed Frank Jackson from New Orleans. They're not going to be a good team, that's for sure. I mean, we can absolutely cross them out when it comes to parsing playoff teams, but I think there's also a case to be made that a team that has so many bodies, a lot of young bodies, in a condensed season, I think maybe that plays to their advantage a little bit. So I think they'll lose a lot of games, but I don't think it's going to be, just a laughable display night to night. I think they'll be relatively competitive. What do you think about the Wizards handing $80 million to Bertans?
I don't think I would have done it, but a lot of money for Bertans. It's not even that tradable of a contract. Like, it's not like you got him on any sort of deal. I'm sure some team will end up taking him at some point because I don't trust the Wizards to win games.
Mhm.
But, there's the reports that John Wall wants out of Washington now after they discussed him for Russell Westbrook in a trade, which, again, was just really strange for both sides, I thought.
Well, Ed, let's pause there. Let's pause there and talk about this. So, which side would you prefer? Let's say it's just straight up Wall for Westbrook. Which side wins that trade in your mind?
I think Westbrook, Wall's injuries, like the Achilles. I don't know. I think John Wall's a better player than Westbrook when healthy, but
right.
I don't know. It was such a strange deal. I'm like, is this a lose-lose? Like, what am I looking at here?
The timing was weird. I mean, obviously we knew Westbrook, wanted out, but I think like John Wall has been pretty committed, and the Wizards have been extremely committed to getting him back. And it's like, all right, he's finally back. Season's a month away. All right, get me out of here.
Right. And the thing is, the rest of their team is still awful. Like, Hachimura is probably going to start. They signed Robin Lopez to be their backup center, who played, I think, like 10 minutes in the playoffs for the Bucks. Yeah. Denny Avdia seems like he's going to play for this team. Troy Brown. It's just like, I don't know, man. Like, it's a lot of money to give Bertans. I know they didn't want to lose him. And again, you keep the asset and you try to flip him later, but it's a lot of money for a guy who is going to be just a 3-point shooter for you.
Just turned 28 as well. I mean, he's only been in the league for 4 years, but he didn't start at 19 or 20 like most of these guys. So, I mean, you're looking at 33 years old by the time this deal is up. And, I unlike Bogdanovic, who they are similar in age, but it just doesn't seem like in 2 years you'll maybe be able to flip that for great value, right? I think there is something to be said for preserving the asset, but to then give said asset, a long-term deal like that, I just, if and when things eventually go haywire, whether it's this season or next season, like you're just not going to want that $80 million sitting on your books after you've maybe traded Bradley Beal and are, counting down the days till the Wall contract is up. It was, I don't necessarily mind the year by year value. I think I just would have gone shorter on the deal, and maybe they couldn't have.
Yeah, and he also doesn't. Again, he's not going to add more skills, right?
No.
He's just going to shoot threes. He's already shooting 8 a game and hitting 40% of them, or 9 a game and hitting 40% of them, which I don't think will increase. He also has a horrible playoff track record. Mm-hmm. Played 23 playoff games, 30% from 3 on 47 attempts. So I don't know. It's a lot of money for Bertans.
Well, and it's also at a time when if you're Washington, I don't think you're like, all right, hey, we're going to strike. These other teams are down. Like there are 6 or 7 really good teams in the East, and like even if John Wall comes back and is really good, and Bradley Beal is awesome again, and maybe Avdia is better than expected, like where does that get you at best? Like 6 seed? I just don't understand the upside there. But again, there's something for having to preserve an asset. Let's go back to Detroit. Extremely puzzling. I think this is taking all their moves together. I think this was the team that was just kind of the biggest question mark as far as like the Jeremy Grant thing. I like Jeremy Grant. I think everybody agrees that he was great in the playoffs, maybe a little overrated on the defensive end. What does Jeremy Grant give this Detroit Pistons team for the next 3 years? That I don't understand this at all. I don't think you don't look at Jeremy Grant as somebody who you're like, all right, well, if you get him in a different system, he could be a number 1 or number 2 guy. It's not like Pascal Siakam, who just needs more opportunity to go, to take his game to another level. I mean, Jeremy Grant could be a super role player, but he could be a super role player with any team. I don't think his role, what he does offensively, is going to change dramatically in Detroit. And with Derrick Rose and Blake Griffin still on the roster, he's still probably their number 3 guy as of right now. We'll see if maybe they move one or both of those guys eventually, but and even if they weren't there, do you want Jeremy Grant? You're not running things through Jeremy Grant, are you? I just thought this was really strange. Maybe I don't even care about the money. It was just, it doesn't make sense for a team that's nowhere near competing.
These look like win now moves when you look at the roster, right? For a team that otherwise has just completely given off the vibe of we're tanking. Right. Mason Plumlee, first of all, you're giving these guys, Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, a combined $90 million. I think 85 million technically. Mason Plumlee is 30, by the way. Jeremy Grant is 20. So if you're actually tanking, why are you giving a 26-year-old all your money, basically, when he's going to be 30 by the time the team is good. And again, like Jeremy Grant, if they clear out Blake Griffin and they clear out Derrick Rose, right, and he becomes a 1 or 2 option on this team, sure, he'll probably average what, like 19-6, maybe 18-6. But what does that even do? What does that get you? What's his, like, are you banking on him scoring 25 points a game and then you flip him again? Or are you
ISOing Jeremy Grant ever?
Right.
Like I just don't know where, like, he's gonna get he got those point totals and rebound totals in Denver, but it was doing little things. He was running the floor, crashing the boards, hitting open threes. He can still do those things. I just don't see. I don't understand the upside. I think if you're Detroit, spend that money on Christian Wood, who we're not sure what his ceiling is. Like, I think we already have a pretty good handle on what Jeremy Grant's ceiling is. It's a nice ceiling, but it's not the type of ceiling that you take a shot like this on in free agency when you're in the position that Detroit's in.
100%. Yeah, he's not who you make their rebuild around.
I forgot about the Plumlee signing too. I think that's the one that I mentally blocked out. I mean, my goodness, that was egregious on a number of levels. We covered the Hawks. Let's go let's head west now to the Lakers. All the way back, over a week ago now, they land Dennis Schroeder from Oklahoma City. That kind of kicked things off in trade season, and then I was really impressed and borderline shocked by the caliber of players that they were able to add. And we'll get into Montrezl Harrell shortly and what that means, especially after how he looked in the bubble. I will say I do not like the Marc Gasol signing. I thought he looked extremely washed up for most of last season and even more washed up in the bubble. I think there were better options out there. But from a teammate perspective, swapping out JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard and bringing in Marc Gasol, one of the better veteran guys in the league, I think is huge from that perspective, just from like a LeBron James sanity angle. You essentially swap out Avery Bradley and Danny Green for Wes Matthews. You bring back KCP. They were able to keep Markieff Morris on a really team-friendly deal. Did lose Rajon Rondo as well, but also able to hold on to Kyle Kuzma. You're able to acquire Schroeder via trade. You don't have to throw Kuzma in there. Again, he's been a depreciating asset essentially since the 2018 Summer League came to a close. But that is still somebody that at midseason, if you want to go add a B level asset, you still have Kyle Kuzma in the holster to do so. So I think it's hard to argue that the Lakers didn't get better. But I'm curious to get your take first on Montrezl Harrell, what the fit is there, how surprised you were that he was able to be lured away from the Clippers on what I thought was a much cheaper deal than I expected.
That was really shocking. One of the more shocking free agency happenings was him just switching LA teams on a pretty small deal. Right. It seems like he probably could have gotten paid somewhere else, but apparently wants to win. I think the fit between him and Anthony Davis is fine. I mean, Anthony Davis hates playing center during the regular season. He just won't do it. So you need to fill those minutes, and having Harrell there to do that makes a lot of sense. He can play 26, 28 minutes a game, whatever it is. You have Gasol fill some of that time. Maybe Gasol's not really an every night player for them. They got him on a super cheap deal too. 2 years, $5.5 million, basically. So, I mean, I love these moves. And, when the playoffs come, I'm not so sure about maybe Harrell being on the floor since he looked so bad last playoffs. But again, maybe having LeBron there be a playmaker for him will help. Like LeBron, Montrez pick and rolls should be pretty good. I mean, Schroeder, Harrell pick and rolls are going to be great on their own. It's last season everyone made a huge deal about, it's the Lou Williams, Montrez Harrell bench unit. It just dominates other bench units while Paul George and Kawhi Leonard starts. The Lakers just did that, but now it's better because they got Schroeder instead of Lou Williams.
It's not often that you can buy low on the reigning sixth man of the year. I'll say that. Right. And they got an awesome deal on Harrell, and that's where it becomes about. If they had paid Marcus Morris money for Montrezl Harrell, I would not feel great about it. I felt like the Marcus Morris overpay, that felt like a classic Lakers deal from the last 10 years, or the LeBron post-title contract, but it's a post blowing a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets contract for some reason. Yeah, I'm with you on Harrell. I think when it comes to the playoffs, if he's playing 12 minutes a game, you live with that. They got by with that just fine. Moving Davis to center last year. With Gasol, I'm with you as well. I think there's a lot of nights where he's kind of this version of late career Tyson Chandler, where he would maybe start and play like 6 minutes and then play the first couple minutes of the second half, and that's it. I think he's just there so Anthony Davis doesn't get bodied by Nikola Jokic in round 2 of the playoffs next year. I think he's literally just there to stand behind Jokic and, not let him get all the way to the hoop for some of the layups that he had in the West Finals this past year.
100%. I'm deep into this Marcus Morris deal now. Sorry. Like, I heard what you said, but I'm also, he averaged 12 points a game in the playoffs. He's 31. I gave him $64 million.
That was baffling. I don't understand it. I mean, have you seen like an actual explanation for this yet? Like, was Kawhi like, we need to pay him everything? Like, was there another offer that was within 20 million of that?
It's a great question. I have no idea. Like, I know he shot really well. Okay. In the playoffs, he basically shot 50-50-90, but like, is that going to happen again? I don't know.
Do you ever have confidence that a Marcus Morris shot is for sure going down? A swing to him for a wide open 3 on the wing. Are you ever like, oh, that's cash?
No, not really. I mean, he has an insane playoff track record shooting threes, but that's got to regress. It's like he's a career 44% 3-point shooting stick, right?
The playoffs?
Yeah, playoffs.
Wow. Okay, well, never mind. I stand corrected. It's actually a value deal by the Clippers. What is your thought quickly on Bradley going to the Heat? I feel like I got the impression that the Lakers were not happy that he did not show up to the bubble, and they were like, I followed all the Lakers stuff on Instagram, Twitter. There was nothing about Avery Bradley at all. From the day that he announced he wasn't coming to the bubble, there was like nothing about like him getting a ring or like, I think they were just like, all right, if you're not coming, we're done with you, man. Like, whatever. We kind of were really hoping that you would come and help us win this title. I think it was like a good riddance, like, thank you for your service during the regular season, but go do whatever you want. I think it's a big loss personnel wise. I think he's kind of underrated, but bringing KCP back on an overpay, but like by post championship LeBron teammate standards, like not that bad of a contract. But yeah, I mean, overall, the Lakers are in better shape than last year, certainly. And that should scare some teams, but we could go to the Clippers now. We've been talking about Marcus Morris. I thought their best addition by far was Ibaka. If I'm the Lakers, I would rather have Ibaka certainly than Marc Gasol. And obviously Gasol was much more attainable. I would rather have Ibaka than Montrezl Harrell, than Wes Matthews. Like, to me, the Ibaka signing is as impactful as the Lakers adding Schroeder.
Yeah, I think so. It helps them. I mean, they can run a legitimate stretch 5 now, which I think was something they were missing, and Doc Rivers was clearly searching for when he was like playing, Patrick Patterson or whoever. Like, it's really good for them to get a rim protector at 5 and a 3-point shooter. Because Zubac, it seemed like they were going to just run a lot of Zubac, which I would love. Been the best for their team.
Right.
But yeah, I think when you have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, who are like, they're good offensive players, they're not pure playmakers. And Lou Williams has struggled in the playoffs, and he is a good passer. But again, how much can you really play him? Mm-hmm. You need to space the offense out because they're not really going to make a ton of stuff happen necessarily, like the way a great passer would. So it is a huge get for them. I think it's a strong move for sure.
Absolutely stole Luke Kennard as well.
Oh yeah,
on draft night. That was a home run deal. I think you're buying very low on Luke Kennard, who we'll see. Maybe there's some some lingering knee issues that we don't know about, and that's maybe part of the reason Detroit was able to pretty comfortably part ways with him. But that's a huge bench addition. Maybe he ends up if you play Kawhi at the 4 and you bring Morris off the bench, maybe you have Kennard starting some nights at the 2 or the 3. But if he's like your kind of second option off the bench alongside Lou Williams, I think that's a really underrated and big addition for the Clips.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they got him for the 19th pick technically, and they lost Shamet.
Shamet was involved. Yeah, I mean they got by far the best of that 3-way deal, I thought.
100%.
Yeah, Kennard. They gave up like nothing.
I know. Yeah, Kennard. He's been a 40% 3-point shooter for his career. So it was a really good move for them for sure.
That was one of those where I think after it went through, like every team in the league was like, "Are you serious? We would have beat that offer in 2 seconds."
Yeah, because he's someone who can almost take over when Lou Williams is done if they want to move Lou Williams, or if he just can't do it in the playoffs. Like, he averaged 16 and 4 last season in 33 minutes. I don't know if he's going to play 33 minutes for the Clippers, but
even if he's just your spot up shooter who can, do a little bit off the dribble, like he's way overqualified for that. I think that's going to be an awesome fit. Christian Wood in Houston. So as of now, the Rockets appear to be standing pat when it comes to James Harden. With Westbrook, it's hard to say. I think they'd be a lot more interested in trading Westbrook. I think there's, part of the issue with Westbrook still being on the team is there's just not nearly as much interest. And, with Harden, he's made it clear he wants to go to one place. That obviously makes a trade more difficult as well. But I think the Christian Wood addition, they also brought in DeMarcus Cousins on a minimum deal. Why not? Might as well. The Wood addition to me is a really nice pickup. 3 years, $41 million. I mean, that is $23 million fewer than Marcus Morris received. I don't know if we've touched on that. I think this is a great, whether you end up getting backed into a corner and have to trade James Harden, even if you keep James Harden, I think I love this either way. This was, I think, one of the top 3 or 4 just best, value upside type of signings that we saw of the entire week.
Yeah, I agree. He looked awesome with Detroit when after they traded Drummond and Blake Griffin wasn't there. He put up huge numbers, obviously, basically 20 and 10. I don't think he's going to do that with Houston, obviously, but for a team that wants to not play small, you get Christian Wood, who can play center, who can still shoot 3, so you can still run 5 out while also not losing a ton of size. Again, getting Cousins on the minimum, something I kind of forgot happened, but is a strong move for them. Like when he was last healthy with the Warriors, he looked good. Yeah. I don't know how much of that is still. I don't know how much of that he still has, but 2 really good moves for them. And so, again, like you said, if they try to win now and they keep Harden and Westbrook, it should work. If they move Harden to Westbrook, he's part of their rebuilding then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's too early to cross off Houston, and I think everyone was ready to do that when Harden wanted out, and I think eventually he probably does get out because that's how it works in the NBA when you're a superstar. But can't fault them for what they've done so far to, I guess, if it's convince Harden to stay or whatever. I mean, I think, like I said, with the Wood signing, I think they're just acting independent of Harden, and it's like we can get this guy at a good price. We're going to do it regardless of our roster context. Let's move to the Blazers, who added Robert Covington via trade. That I think they gave up the 16th pick in the draft last week, and then a protected pick next year. I like that deal a lot. I think you and I are about as high on Robert Covington as anyone. I know there are people out there who kind of see him as a Josh Richardson type, where the name has maybe started to exceed the production the last few years. But the Blazers desperately needed somebody like him in this lineup, and I think you're rolling out now Lillard, McCollum, Covington, Zach Collins, Nurkic. You bring back Carmelo Anthony, who is by all means a great fit. You bring back Enes Kanter, who has had some of his better years in the past in Portland, although everyone knows the limitations there. I don't think I feel great about Portland. I was listening to a pod last night that I think someone had them like 4th in the West. I mean, maybe the upside's there. If Lillard plays like he did the second half of last year, that's certainly a possibility. If Nurkic looked awesome in the bubble, after being off for, a really long period. But at the same time, like a lot of their depth issues, I don't know if they've really been solved. I like Gary Trent. Rodney Hood's coming off of an extremely severe injury. They add Derek Jones, who's, kind of always been the 8th, 9th man. It does feel like there's still that team that's like one injury away from potentially falling out of the playoffs, as they basically did last year.
Yeah, I think that was Bobby Marks who said he thought they had the best offseason. And it's like, do they have one of your family members hostage, Bobby? Like, what is going on?
They had a fine offseason. Like, they didn't have the best offseason.
No. They needed a Covington for sure, because when you have Lillard and McCollum as a backcourt, a negative on defense. And, Nurkic is a good defender. Melo, depending on how much he plays, that's a negative on defense. So, yeah, getting Covington is great for them. Perfect pickup for them. Remains to be seen how much Melo's going to play. Again, I'm still interested. They basically added Rodney Hood and John Collins, too, right? Yeah. Because those guys are coming back from injury, so that's important to know. They had a good offseason, but a half of it is just guys coming back from injury.
Well, part of it, you mentioned Collins. I mean, they also very quietly clarified earlier this week that he's going to miss at least the first month of the year, it sounds like. So that's starting to become a little bit more of a concern just in terms of his long-term durability. I think that's probably a factor too, in why they were eager to bring Melo back.
Yeah, and they also got Derek Jones, which I'm not like. I mean, is anyone like a Derek Jones, fan? But he's.
I mean, that as a dunk contest aficionado, yes. As a regular basketball aficionado, no.
Good depth, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the Suns. I think they are probably now in my mind at least, the prohibitive favorite for like team that I'll just be low key rooting for all year to be really good. Like they're the team I think with that kind of has a lot of the things that Portland is missing. They don't have Damian Lillard, but they do have Devin Booker, who's on track to be probably as good as Damian Lillard in a year or two. Obviously, you add Chris Paul, and as I said, on the pod with James last week, the fact that they were able to do all of this while keeping McCall Bridges, keeping Cam Johnson, keeping the number 10 pick in Wednesday's draft, which it was kind of a weird one, taking Jalen Smith that high, a guy they probably could have traded back and taken 8 spots later. But their team, I mean, they did the same thing last year with Cam Johnson essentially, and it worked out well. So I'm not, especially in a draft like this, I'm not going to get on a team for having the conviction to take somebody that they really like, especially at 10. They also bring back Saric, so you have almost the entire core of last year's team that went 8-0 in the bubble. You add Chris Paul, you get rid of Ricky Rubio. I think we've gone over the risks that come with Chris Paul so many times. We don't need to rehash that. But if you assume Chris Paul plays 80 to 85% of the season, I mean, how comfortable are you saying, yes, I think I'm confident that the Phoenix Suns will be in the playoffs?
That's tough. I mean, I think maybe like 65, 70%.
See, I don't. If you guarantee me Chris Paul stays relatively healthy, I'm pretty confident they get in. I mean, look what this roster is significantly better than the Oklahoma City roster that he dragged to the 5 seed last year.
Right. Oh yeah, I'm looking at the standings. OKC is out. I don't think Memphis is in.
Houston could be out.
Yeah, they're basically competing with Minnesota, New Orleans, and Golden State. And yeah, Golden State's kind of a mess right now. But yeah, I mean, I like what the Suns did. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, both top 25 players. When you have an opportunity to do that, I think you pull the trigger, even if it's slightly short-sighted and risky. I love Mikal Bridges. Jay Crowder was an awesome signing for them. Really shores up their power forward spot. DeAndre Ayton looked really good in the bubble and just overall last season. Like he could take another step forward. So I'm excited about the Suns, and I guess I would be surprised if they didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's fair at this point. And I think Houston is kind of the swing team for me, where you said the Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, those are for sure locks. We'll get to Golden State in a little bit. I would certainly be confident in Golden State making it, but I don't think we can say they're for sure a lock given some of the injury concerns. If Houston trades Harden and goes to a rebuild, all of a sudden you're kicking out 2 of last year's teams, and I think that opens up a spot for Phoenix, and then then it becomes a bigger debate. I think which teams of like Memphis, San Antonio, Sacramento, New Orleans, Minnesota, which teams fill that other vacancy that would be in that top 8. But I feel pretty good about Phoenix. It's, I mean, similar to Atlanta, where it's like, all right, we have this young core, now we're going to hit accelerate on trying to compete. But at the same time, it's like, what really is the ceiling? Especially in the West, I don't think anyone would pick this Suns team over either of the LA teams, probably not over Denver. But they certainly put themselves in the conversation for what happens if LeBron tweaks his knee and misses 2 months, or Davis, if something happens to him in the playoffs. Like they're at least going to be in striking distance, which is not something you could say about the Suns or at any point in the last 12 years.
Right, and they still, I mean, they're a good two-way team as well, right? Chris Paul's a good defender, Mikal Bridges is a good defender, Crowder. So it's not like they just packed down a bunch of offense like the Hawks did, basically. And they'll be fun.
Let's go to New Orleans. Another team that has revamped major parts of its roster. They did hold on to Brandon Ingram, as expected, threw him a max deal, which he signed earlier this week. So Brandon Ingram locked in now with the New Orleans Pelicans. You have a healthy Zion coming back at power forward. Steven Adams at center, which an interesting combination to say the least with he and Zion. You have Eric Bledsoe, you acquired in the Milwaukee deal. They initially had George Hill before sending him away. Still have a lot of intriguing young-ish guys. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, first-round pick last year. Kira Lewis, first-round pick this year. Josh Hart, still relatively young. They picked up Wenyen Gabriel, who gave the Blazers some decent minutes in the playoffs last year. Jackson Hayes, of course. I as a lot of people do, I love this team. I still always root for Lonzo Ball to do well. Brandon Ingram's ascent has been great. Everyone loves Zion. I still am not like fully convinced that they'll be a playoff team this year.
It's a weird team.
Weird team.
Yeah, Steven Adams and Zion don't fit together. Although if you talk about a front court that you would not want to play against, just from like a physical perspective, having to go up against Steven Adams and Zion Williamson in the paint for 48 minutes is crazy.
Well, then you got Brandon Ingram on the wing. I mean, geez.
Yeah, together they make an average NBA 3 through 5. Yeah, Bledsoe is a weird addition. He might be like a 6-man for them. I don't really know. They're kind of halfway between like a win now and a rebuild. Extending Steven Adams I thought was kind of strange, but I don't think this is a playoff team. Unless Zion makes some astronomical leap that I'm not really expecting him to make. Like, I think he'll get better, but I don't think Brandon Ingram can really carry a team. Like, he's still their best player. And if Brandon Ingram's your best player, even if, again, he improves, you're in a great position to necessarily make the playoffs.
They'll certainly be right there. I think they'll be in that mix for probably the 7 or the 8, most likely the 8. I have major concerns about the Ball Bledsoe starting backcourt, if that's what it ends up being. Like, that is a horrific fit on paper. And part of that is just Bledsoe's a tough guy to fit around. If he's not hitting threes, he actually has weirdly some similarities with Lonzo, and Lonzo's a better passer, but I like it defensively for sure. Bledsoe was an all defensive team selectee this past year. But it feels like they're kind of missing one more piece, and they have an aging JJ Redick who can shoot the ball, but outside of that, I mean, you have a pretty shaky shooter in Lonzo, improved but still shaky, very shaky in Bledsoe, a good shooter in Ingram, Zion a non-shooter, Steven Adams a non-shooter. So I have some concern certainly about how that offense is going to go, and we'll see with Zion. It ultimately hinges on the improvement with him. If he comes back, I mean, what did he hit? 5 threes in his first game, 4 threes. And they didn't look great, but the foundation of a 3-point shot is there. They kind of need him to be that guy at some point. If he comes back and is in great shape and looks like the Zion from Duke, I think that changes everything for them. If he comes back and is still a little iffy and every 3 or 4 games, picks up a minor knee issue and misses some time here and there and never can quite get into a groove, then I think this season plays out pretty much exactly like last season. Yeah,
the lack of shooting is it's very worrying. Yes. They're just going to end up being like they're just going to have to offensive rebound a lot. I think that's their game plan. And they also hide Stan Van Gundy. They have a new coach.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that works. But I'm actually, the more I look at this roster, I'm not as optimistic as I even was last season.
No, and again, we always say this, part of it is just how good the West is. It's not like the Pelicans have a bad roster. It's just when you compare it to some other really good teams, it doesn't look all that great. How about Minnesota trading for Ricky Rubio? You are much higher on Rubio than me. I've never been a big Rubio guy. Although I will admit he's coming off a great year in Phoenix. He was an awesome fit there. But this was universally praised by Timberwolves Nation when this one happened. Like, there were people, I looked at the replies to the Wolves tweet when they officially announced it, and it was, I mean, this is like the biggest news in Timberwolves franchise history. This is bigger than getting the number 1 pick by far in this draft. I do wonder about the fit, because you just drafted a guard in Anthony Edwards. You traded for D'Angelo Russell last year. You re-signed Malik Beasley, who's in a little bit of legal hot water, and we'll see how that turns out. You still have Jared Culver. So all of a sudden, I mean, are you bringing the number 1 pick off the bench? Are you starting the number 1 pick out of position at small forward? Where does Beasley fit in all this? Because the thing with Rubio and Russell is, you can't play them really anywhere else. They have to be one of the 2 guard spots, and you can go 3 guards if you want. It's somewhat of a positionless league at this point, but you can't be like, all right, well, we'll just shift Rubio up to small forward. Like Edwards is kind of the only guy of those 3 who's transferable. And for a guy whose development I think was already going to be a bit of a fragile experiment, I don't love the position that they're putting him in, I guess, at least for this immediate season.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting Rubio for the 17th pick is fine. I think that makes sense. And I don't know
sure.
I don't know if I really trust Russell as a playmaker necessarily, like to play a point guard with Towns.
Mhm.
I think having Rubio and Towns as a pick and roll or a pick and pop option makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what you want. You can have Russell out on the wing who can knock down threes. I'm expecting them to start Anthony Edwards as small forward. And I think, I mean, he's in a situation now where he doesn't have to. If he struggles, they can play more Malik Beasley or whatever. Like, it's not all on him to, be the guy every night. So, I mean, they're a little thin at power forward. Maybe they'll try to make a deal to get a power forward, but maybe they'll try to bring Kevin Love back, which would be incredible. But I don't know. I like this team. Again, I'm not sure it's a playoff team. I have my doubts, but I like the moves overall. I mean, you're trying to convince Towns you're trying to win and stuff like that. It's fine.
They might have the worst power forward depth in the league. That's a pretty big problem when you have that big of a hole. Maybe they play a lot of small lineups, and you could maybe go Rubio, Russell, Edwards, Beasley, Towns. I mean, that's an extremely intriguing offensive lineup. Defensively would be problematic. I think would be putting it nicely. But yeah, I mean, right now, like their power forward depth is Hernan Gomez, Jake Layman, who missed basically all of last year, Naz Reid, who played okay, but is kind of a borderline G leaguer. Jaden McDaniels, a rookie, and then Jared Vanderbilt, who's just kind of a flyer guy. So, yeah, that's definitely the area of need. And they do have a glut of talent in the backcourt. They were trying to move Culver before the draft. I think it wouldn't be a shock if they try to pick up somebody. Did they? Where did James Johnson end up?
Dallas.
Totally blanking on this. Dallas. Okay. Had Minnesota been able to hold on to him, I'd feel a little better about it. We could talk about Dallas real quickly. I mean, not that they did a ton, but I like the Johnson addition for them. Felt like they needed another kind of tough type of guy, and he certainly fits that bill. Were you a little bit surprised that Dallas, who historically has been kind of a mover and shaker when it comes to free agency and trades, didn't do too much really other than exchanging Richardson and Curry?
Yeah, it was a little surprising, but I think they just still wanted to keep some flexibility. I think they like their roster. I mean, considering how good they looked in the playoffs, and they're going to get Dwight Powell back from injury. Porzingis is kind of TBD, although he won't be there for opening night. But I think they're kind of standing pat, I guess, maybe looking towards next year, next year's free agency class. I don't know. They must be. If you have Luka Doncic and this roster, you have to feel pretty confident that you can make a legitimate run for the playoffs again, even if teams around you got better.
I think if Luka stays healthy, and I mean, keep in mind, he missed a decent amount of time last year.
Yeah.
What he have, like, I think a couple ankle issues probably cost him 10 games or so. If he's to the point already that if he's relatively healthy, I think you're a lock for the playoffs. Right? I mean, he's just that good. And, they didn't put a great supporting cast around him last year. I think it took a while for Porzingis to really grow into his role, and he looked great by the end of the year. But maybe now you kind of have to go back to square one with him coming off of another injury. But I'm pretty comfortable in Dallas as long as Luke is there. Let's get to a couple quick re-signings that I don't think we'll have a ton to say about these. Fred VanVleet back in Toronto. This was a little bit of a lower number, I thought, for VanVleet. I think it's probably about right. I would not want to throw him $100+ million. But a big retention for Toronto. I think we thought maybe some of these bad teams would be out there like sharks in the water trying to grab him. But Toronto kind of running it back. You lose your two big men in Gasol and Ibaka. But I like the addition of Baines. I think he's an upgrade over Gasol for sure at this point. I think the big question for Toronto right now is Siakam. I don't think there was a single player who lowered his stock more in the bubble than Siakam. Maybe Paul George. But Siakam was right up there. And I think for a guy who, halfway through last season, we were looking at him as, a future number one guy, keys to the franchise eventually type of player. And it kind of looked like he was just like a souped up Jeremy Grant for a lot of that postseason.
Don't do that to Pascal like that.
Am I wrong?
Well, I think Toronto looks worse on paper. I think they are worse. They look pretty thin. Getting VanVleet back is really good. I assume Pascal Siakam will make some leaps, but your second rotation is Baines, Boucher, Alex Len, small forward is OG Anunoby. Like, I like him. He's not incredible. Norman Powell. They signed DeAndre Bembry. I'm not, convinced entirely on Terrence Davis. So I think there's a little bit of concern for Toronto. When the East is as weak as it is, you can kind of run it back with this team and hope you can make some waves in the playoffs. But they definitely got worse this offseason.
Yeah, they're in an interesting spot because I think they were in that class of teams that I think we're not so secretly holding out for a potential Giannis addition next summer. And it's, day by day, that's looking less and less likely. And they've kind of been on this track for a reset really for like 5 or 6 years. And I wouldn't say they lucked their way into the finals last year, but Kawhi arriving was certainly not something they anticipated. I think Kyle Lowry's prime has stretched out, multiple years longer than I thought it would. We'll see if he can do that again next season. I mean, they've reached the point where you have to pencil them in. They're certainly a playoff team, although I think that drop for Lowry is coming at some point. But I think their upside, at least for next season, is probably second, maybe third round, maybe a flame out, in the East Finals. They're going to play hard. They're super well coached. The infrastructure is still there, but I mean, it's hard to see Toronto beating, a team like even Boston, Brooklyn. I think Milwaukee got better. I think Toronto's now kind of fallen slightly below all those teams. Miami, obviously, as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
The other one I wanted to hit on was Joe Harris re-signing in Brooklyn. A little bit of an overpay to me. I think it was $75 million, Bertans type of money for Joe Harris. But he's younger, he's more versatile, and I think more importantly, one, you're preserving the asset for Brooklyn. You could trade him, a guy who's going to retain value pretty well, you would think. And two, they really need him, especially if they do ultimately trade LeVert and or Jared Allen or Spencer Dinwiddie at some point. That shooting is invaluable for just about any team, and especially one that has, Durant and Kyrie and is going to be able to spread the floor as well as anybody. I think Joe Harris is kind of the perfect, I don't even know if I call him a third option, but just like the perfect complementary piece for those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, he's a 44% 3-point shooter over the past 3 seasons. Like, again, I mean, this is when you overpay someone like Joe Harris or Bertans, is when you're in a position to win the NBA championship.
Right.
So exactly. I have no problems with this deal.
Great way to put it. Yeah, it's extremely excusable to do it when it's the move that could very well put you over the top, as opposed to the move that could boost you from the 9 seed to the 7 seed.
Right.
All right, let's address the Golden State Warriors. I'm just going to say it. Controversial opinion. This sucks that Klay Thompson got hurt. A lot of people wouldn't say that, but this is extremely disappointing. Klay Thompson's in like everybody's top 5 coolest players list. I mean, it just sucks. I mean, the 2 straight years without Klay Thompson, and I mean, I was so confident that he would come back and be awesome just because of the type of game that he has. Not somebody who you think would rely a ton on explosive athleticism, anything like that. And who knows how this really happened, but we've seen instances of, you injure a muscle or a bone in one leg, and then you start favoring it as you recover. And, now he blows out the Achilles in the other leg. It's going to be tough, long term. It's obviously a year plus away, but now I think you can really question, is he going to be the same guy? Not only is he getting older, but these 2 injuries back to back. In the immediate future, you put a Band-Aid over things by grabbing Oubre. I thought that was a fine deal. They basically absorbed him with a trade exception. Some major luxury tax implications there, but I think Golden State worries about that probably less than any other team. They're still, in the bones of a good team are there, especially if James Wiseman is really good, and we won't know that maybe for a while. But if he's really good, I think they're a playoff team. I think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt for sure. I will say, as much as I love Steph Curry, we've never really seen Curry have to lead a team like this. We thought we might see it last year. He's always had at least Thompson and Draymond. He hasn't always had Kevin Durant. But it's gonna be a very long time, since Steph Curry has been in a situation like this. We're talking 5-6 years. And I think the Warriors went from, certainly a title contender to a team that you can't cross off, but also a team that you really can't feel very good about right now.
The Warriors do not have a lot of shooting right now. Wiggins not a great 3-point shooter. Oubre is kind of hit or miss. Draymond can't shoot threes anymore. Wiseman doesn't shoot threes. Their bench is awful.
Awful.
Yeah. So it's hard to say they won't make the playoffs, obviously, because Curry's there, Draymond. But like, I don't know, man. Draymond looked awful last year. Again, a lot of this is actually riding on Wiseman, I think. But even the fit between him and Draymond isn't good because Draymond, assuming he can't shoot three still, it's not great. And like Oubre and Wiggins, they're fine. Oubre is better than Wiggins, but like again, off your bench is Brad Wanamaker. That was a big signing for them, which tells you kind of where you are as a team when it's like Brad Wanamaker, like we got him back up to Steph Curry.
A half hour ago, we were just saying that the Celtics bench is terrible, and they willingly let Brad Wanamaker go.
Yep. And
so that's the level of desperation.
Huge signing by getting Kent Bazemore on your bench as well, which like he's good. I don't want to trash him too much, but
2019-20 fantasy sleeper Kent Bazemore.
He will always be a fantasy sleeper for me.
Let's backtrack real quick and talk about the Bucks, and then we'll do kind of a reset and maybe dive into what we see as the new hierarchy in each conference. But we really haven't touched on Milwaukee. I mean, the Bogdanovich deal falling through and that whole thing still being weirdly murky has clouded this offseason. But at the end of the day, they definitely got better in the immediate future.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, when you look into what they gave up, it becomes a little bit more of a tougher pill to swallow. But man to man, they got better. They added a really good guard in Drew Holiday, who is a clear upgrade over Eric Bledsoe and even an upgrade over the Bledsoe-Hill tandem. So now you're looking at Holiday, DiVincenzo, Middleton, Giannis, Brook Lopez. That's a strong starting five. It's stronger than last season's. I actually really like a lot of the moves that they made around the margins as well. So we'll start with the bad, though. The Connaughton extension, which was, you can read about it. There's an extensive breakdown, I think, by John Hollinger in The Athletic about how Milwaukee kind of botched this one from a financial perspective, which is becoming a little bit of a concerning trend for that front office. But either way, you return a familiar face in Connaughton. I did not like the Augustine deal at all. I thought that was really bad value for a guy who's on the decline. Thought there are better options out there. But I love the Bryn Forbes edition, and I kind of like the Torrey Craig edition as well. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but Bobby Portis on that deal, I really don't mind because I think they're kind of gone away from some of their system guys who, when it got to the playoffs, and the system kind of broke down a little bit, couldn't do anything. Your Sterling Brown is no longer on this team. Bledsoe, I think, was kind of the main culprit for that. So they've gotten rid of some of those guys. Bobby Portis is like the opposite of a system player in every sense of the word. But, if you're only going to play Giannis maybe 31, 32 minutes again, I don't hate Bobby Portis as a guy you can throw out there and be like, hey, go take 12 shots in the next 12 minutes and try to get us 20 points and 7 rebounds.
Yeah, Portis also is probably going to play backup 5. Like he looks like he's going to play backup 4 and 5 . Like Bobby
Offers
Portis,
a little bit of shooting. I don't know. He like. Would you rather have him or the combination of Robin Lopez and Ersan Ilyasova?
Oh, Bobby Portis.
That's basically what you're replacing.
6th man of the year, Bobby Portis hype starts now. Yeah, Covington was an overpay. DJ Augustine was an overpay. Paying those guys a combined, what is it, like $37 million or something, is a lot. But again, yeah, I'm with you. I like Bryn Forbes, Torrey Craig. I don't know if they're going to start Augustine, if they're going to start DiVincenzo, but this is really all they were able to do, right? After you lose on Bogdanovich, you just kind of have to shuffle things around Giannis and Middleton, and to some extent Brook Lopez. I think overall, yeah, they got better, and they got better while Boston got worse, while Toronto got worse, while Miami stayed the same. Indiana stayed the same. Philly stayed the same or got worse, potentially. I think they had a good offseason.
Yeah, I agree. So let's start with the East and just kind of give me your general hierarchy. We keep talking about which teams we would pencil in for the playoffs. How many teams would you say right now, given average to above average injury luck, are locks to make the playoffs?
Milwaukee, I think Toronto, Boston, Indiana, Miami, Philly, Brooklyn. So 7. The teams that made the playoffs last year. And then, I mean, that 8th spot, I think, is just going to be between Atlanta and Chicago, maybe Washington. But, okay. Yeah, I have 7 locks, basically.
So of those 7, the one that I feel the most shaky about is Indiana by far. Because
Oladipo.
That whole situation is weird. Yeah. And even though they basically ended up retaining their whole roster, I don't know. I mean, like if those guys play out next season together, they are going to make the playoffs. But I'm just not convinced that that's not going to blow up at some point. But you feel so. Orlando was obviously the 8th seed this past year by a pretty big margin, 6 games between them and Charlotte. Do you feel confident enough to say that you would pencil in Atlanta over Orlando?
Yeah, or maybe even Chicago.
Okay. All right. So new question then. Who are your top 3 teams in the East in order?
Milwaukee, Miami. Oh no, wait. Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Miami.
And is that in terms of regular season finish or title favorite?
I think title favorite.
Okay,
I don't know.
that's
just what my gut told me.
I think that's fair. I honestly, I would sell high on Miami a little bit this year. I think they'll be very good next year. I think, I don't know. I think there's a chance that we'll look back and be like, okay, for whatever reason, they benefited from the bubble more than other teams did. You know, like I think everybody liked Miami, but they've gained, I think, a little more helium than maybe they should. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a nice season next year, but I don't think they're just going to be a perennial title contender all of a sudden with this core.
Yeah, I could see that.
All right, so same question for the West. How many locks do you have?
Both LA teams, Denver, Utah, I think Houston. I don't know. Houston's tough.
Okay, if you have to think about it, it's not a lock.
Okay. Portland. I think that's it.
That's 5? Okay. So I would add Dallas to that list.
Yeah, I thought about Dallas.
Okay. So that leaves the 4 and 5 from last year. Houston and OKC are not locks. I wouldn't lock up the Suns, but I would feel better about the Suns for sure making it than the Rockets, because I think there's a bigger risk for the Rockets blowing it up. I mean, the Rockets are basically the West version of Indiana in some ways.
Right. Yeah, I think Dallas would have been my other lock, but I don't know. Phoenix looks just as good as them in some aspects. So I don't know.
If we're assuming good health, I think I would lock up Golden State as a playoff team.
Sure. Yeah.
But the health for them is a bigger question than I think for any other team. All right, last question on this then. Between Memphis, San Antonio, Sacramento, New Orleans, Minnesota, let's say one playoff spot is available for those 5 teams. Which of those 5 would you most confidently say could grab the 8 seed? Again, Memphis, San Antonio, Sacramento, New Orleans, Minnesota.
Maybe Minnesota. Yeah, I'm gonna say Minnesota.
Okay.
It was tough. I was between that and the Pelicans, but again, I don't really. That Pelicans roster, something feels wrong with it. Not that
I want to give some benefit of the doubt to Memphis too, but with Jackson being hurt to begin the year, I think there's a chance they get off to a slow start. I know we've both been a little lower on them.
Yeah, their roster does not. They didn't get any better at all, and everyone else, they didn't do anything. They did
nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, they got Hazonia.
Right. I think there's a chance San Antonio has like one last little gasp in it. I mean, they still have DeRozan and Aldridge. Like they'll be competent at least. Wouldn't shock me if they just kind of clawed their way to like 40 wins, whatever it'll take this year to get that 8.
Yeah, I would not bank on it.
All right, that just about does it. We did this in almost a flat hour. Good job by both of us. I will be back with James later today. We're going to do a little post-draft recap, start to look ahead at some of the futures odds as well. So make sure to tune into that. All right, nice. That was good.
Hi, fans. Please like our video and subscribe to the RotoWire channel. Then please go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.